Ethics, morality, and Machiavellianism. Do not be too moral. You may cheat yourself out of much life so. Aim above morality. Be not simply good. Be good for something. Henry David Thoreau. Contents. 1. Introduction. 2. Individualism and collective adaptation. 3. Intelligence and ethical nuance. 4. Guarding reputation and the futility of debating morality. 5. Sadistic morality and the nature of betrayal. 6. The necessity of Machiavellianism. 7. My perspective. 8. In closing. 1. Introduction. Morals are too emotional to be settled through consensus. Ironically, they must often be imposed through a platonic noble lie such as religion. Though immoral in itself, this can be seen as deceit with altruistic intent. It serves a greater good, and for those who value ethics or altruistic Machiavellianism, it can be reasonably justified. Religion, like any corporation or government, can be co-opted by those who abandon its purpose of serving the public good and instead use it for personal gain. Such betrayal is corruption. In a civilizational context, corruption is the sabotage of societal infrastructure for self-interest, even though both society and the exploiter depend on that very infrastructure. Few aspire to martyrdom, and those who do are often puppeted by others, pretending to serve the public good while serving themselves. To do good, one must be skilled in the strategies commonly employed by evil. Evil succeeds because it leaves nothing to chance, while good often falters for lack of rigor. A man of strong moral conviction, who also masters the tactics of evil, is rare. Thus, many doubt the existence of the moral Machiavellian. Though uncommon, and though the business of power is inherently dirty, I contend such men exist in small numbers. Powerful knowledge carries a certain taint. The more one learns of cunning, the more likely one is to use it, for power is inherently seductive. Often such knowledge is sought out of powerlessness, and the powerless are frequently more neurotic than the powerful. Yet, when the powerful fail to know when to stop, corruption follows. Whether power is used for altruistic or sadistic ends defines whether a Machiavellian is moral or immoral. Yet since sadism feeds narcissism, the latter is more common. A moral Machiavellian is one who holds principles above ego, but such principles must be concealed. Exposed, they become an Achilles heel, ripe for exploitation by those who do not share them. Key points. Morality is imposed through noble lies like religion. Institutions are vulnerable to corruption. True altruism is rare. Most serve self-interest. Doing good requires mastery of evil strategies. Power knowledge is tempting and corrupting. Machiavellians can be moral or immoral, but sadism is common. Principles must be hidden, or they become weaknesses. 2. Individualism and collective adaptation. In ethics, individualism is the root of sadism, which I view as the purest form of immorality, for it is predatory rather than pragmatic. In collectivist societies, women may couple with subpar men out of social pressure, a practice that helps civilization function by incentivizing men to produce. Ignorant men, by contrast, sacrifice for family and society simply because they know no better. Content with mating rights and a sense of purpose, they give themselves to the greater good, and from this sacrifice arises civilization. Without it, only tribalism remains. Civilization was built on the labor of the nuclear family, not on individualism. It is itself proof of the Aristotelian adage that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In an individualist society, neither party cares for anything beyond themselves. A scarcity of cooperation follows, causing civilization to regress until it collapses entirely. The pace of this decline may be slow or swift, but the end is the same. This is what we mean by the decline. Individualism fosters Machiavellianism, which almost inevitably produces immorality on a societal scale. The collapse of the family is disastrous because it accelerates this process. Without the family, individualism rises, and with it, Machiavellianism, followed by immorality, exploitation, sadism, and subclinical psychopathy. Machiavellianism and narcissism are socially maladaptive traits. Within a family, any such tendencies are checked by compassion, and if they appear, they are biological rather than socialized. Without a tribe, however, these qualities become survival strategies, as maladaptive traits thrive where cooperation and loyalty are absent. When no one is looking out for them, people feel compelled to become more ruthless to succeed. The logic is clear. With few or no trustworthy social ties, an individual must be more effective on their own, for they have only themselves to rely upon. The adoption of Machiavellianism as both tool and philosophy is a rational response to an uncertain world that denies the individual a stable and compassionate family. We may bemoan this loss, but we cannot escape the time in which we live. Since we live in it, we must adapt to it. Key points. Individualism is the root of sadism. Collectivism sustains civilization through sacrifice and cooperation. Families are the backbone of civilization. When families collapse, individualism rises. Individualism fosters Machiavellianism and narcissism. These traits are socially maladaptive. Without loyal ties, people grow ruthless. Machiavellianism becomes a survival tool in uncertain times. 3. Intelligence and ethical nuance. Only men of higher intelligence can truly wrestle with the subtleties of ethics. They are capable of weighing altruism against cruelty, principle against expediency, and deliberately choosing balance. For those innately sadistic, only conscious discipline and self-control can restrain such impulses. Foolish men, by contrast, are not guided by reason, but by indoctrination. They are taught morality as a rigid script. When they eventually see through the artificiality of that conditioning, many swing to the opposite extreme, embracing cruelty with zeal. Lacking a mediating intellect, their choices are driven almost entirely by emotion, unchecked and untempered by deeper thought. It takes a sharper mind to walk the middle path when society itself can no longer enforce a shared moral order. Idiots claim to value liberty, but they cannot handle it. What they truly want is the freedom to pursue incentive and indulge sadism without being labeled immoral. To be called immoral risks ostracism, and ostracism diminishes their effectiveness. This is why the immoral prefer to be called amoral. To make such people productive in a system that grants them liberty, morality must be imposed until altruism becomes their preference. Key points. Intelligent men balance altruism and sadism through reason and discipline. Foolish men, lacking nuance, swing between indoctrinated morality and crude sadism. Liberty without restraint drives them to selfishness and emotional decisions. To keep them productive, morality must be imposed until altruism becomes habitual. 4. Guarding reputation and the futility of debating morality. The fact that one is capable of extreme corruption does not mean one must act on it. Yet in the absence of a shared moral framework, people hide behind subjectivity, twist definitions, and posture as though winning the argument matters more than living by any coherent ethic. For such people, appearing right outweighs being principled. Those inclined toward altruism are willing to give up some personal freedom for the sake of the collective. Those inclined toward sadism will not, unless compelled by incentive or the rare intervention of self-discipline. This is why the noble lie remains necessary. Most people are driven more by reward and punishment than by principle. If they believe in it, it restrains the sadist. If they reject it, it leaves them cast out by the majority who still uphold it. A noble lie is a myth or falsehood deliberately told by rulers to maintain social harmony or stability. In discussions of morality, you will often hear empty rationalizations such as, everyone creates their own morals. In truth, the only people who argue this way are those aware of their own cruelty and seeking to justify it. The fact that the natural order is amoral, whether we frame it as evolution or survival of the fittest. It does not erase the human ability to choose between altruism and exploitation. That choice is uniquely ours. Human beings are capable of compassion even though the foundations of existence are neutral. To excuse sadism by appealing to Darwin or cosmic indifference is self-deception. Recognize your nature honestly. If you dislike what you see, work to change it. Debating endlessly with those raised in different systems or shaped by different genetics is a waste of time. The noble lie is the closest thing to a universal standard we will ever achieve. My purpose here is not to persuade you into agreement, but to examine the matter with clarity, because the exploration itself has value. 5. Sadistic morality and the nature of betrayal. Free from religious or moral imposition, people do not create ethical systems so much as selectively apply pre-existing morals when it suits them. In times of peace, some individuals are innately sadistic, while others are innately altruistic. These traits exist along a spectrum, with overlap that shifts according to circumstance. In wartime, destruction becomes a necessity for survival, and all men possess the capacity for it. Yet necessity does not imply enjoyment. There is a fundamental difference between the man who becomes destructive when war arrives and the man who eagerly awaits its arrival. Soldiers often describe the battlefield as the eighth circle of hell, yet there is always an eerie presence within the battalion. It is the man who appears to revel in the chaos. These are the sadists who finally find a socially sanctioned outlet for their true nature. Nowhere else are acts of barbarity so thoroughly disguised, so easily justified, or so effectively camouflaged as they are on the battlefield. The assumption of the so-called amoral sadist is fundamentally flawed. It is nothing more than a projection of one's own moral deficiencies onto those who possess a more altruistic nature. This mindset assumes that, absent an implicit or explicit threat of force, others will invade your property, plunder it, and violate anyone within it the moment opportunity arises. It presumes that power alone restrains human behavior, rather than any intrinsic moral or altruistic impulse within the individual. Yet this belief is itself revealing. The sadist projects unconsciously, mistaking his own pleasure in exploitation for a universal human trait, when in reality it is a highly individualized disposition. One must remember that the sadist respects only power, and therefore lacks any frame of reference for innate altruism. Because of this limitation, he dismisses the idea that someone might refrain from depravity by choice, not fear. He assumes others would commit such acts if given the chance, simply because he would. Morally, humanity is a diverse species, yet in a twist of irony, the sadist mirrors the naive altruist indoctrinated by the noble lie. Both universalize their own moral orientation. Each imposes his internal framework onto others, failing to account for the nuance of individual differences. Following this line of reasoning, an important lesson emerges. Some individuals will betray you in the absence of power. Others will not. In romantic dynamics, women will do so reliably, as this behavior is rooted in their incentives and wiring. Some men will act similarly, though not all. When encountering a new person, your task is to discern whether they are predisposed toward altruism or sadism. Once this distinction is clear, you can determine whether betrayal would stem from enjoyment or only arise under extreme necessity, such as survival. Sadists are a poor investment because their cooperation cannot be relied upon as a product of altruistic volition. Instead, one must continually outmaneuver them to secure compliance. This makes cooperation costly, and most would be better served investing their time in alliances that do not require constant strategic maintenance. It follows then that a sadist is a bad bet to those who recognize the pattern. Lacking the capacity or willingness to alter this trait, the sadist is compelled to conceal or suppress it, sexuality aside. For this reason, I would advise any sadist who encounters this text to confine such impulses to the private sphere. This is, of course, a recommendation rather than a command, and the final decision rests with the individual alone. 6. The necessity of Machiavellianism. Regardless of one's disposition, Machiavellianism remains necessary. If an altruistic moral code cannot be imposed universally, then naive, thoughtless altruism carries little value. It is remarkably easy to guide men through incentives, yet altruism that does not arise innately must be ushered in through the noble lie. For this reason, Machiavellianism consistently prevails. No matter which morals people profess to accept, psychological leverage can override preference by constraining options, shaping incentives, and exploiting cognitive bias. In tactical contexts, altruism is easily outmaneuvered by sadism, and it functions only so long as all parties remain altruistic. A single sadist is enough to destabilize the system and introduce strategic manipulation. Once this occurs, altruists eventually realize they have been exploited, seek to emulate the tactics used against them, and risk adopting the very traits they despise. Do not be a naive altruist. Altruism should be rationed and applied selectively. Yet neither should one expect redemption in unchecked sadism, which corrodes trust just as reliably, only from the opposite direction. To be frivolously ruthless is nearly as inept as being frivolously altruistic. Always weigh cost against benefit. Always analyze. Always maintain a contingency. Be altruistic when you can afford it. It is psychologically stabilizing and advantageous to one's reputation. 7. My perspective. The altruistic are too easily exploited. The sadistic, too gratuitously destructive in their exploitation. The plausible deniability in addressing such subjects rests in the fact that this knowledge can be applied defensively as a means of protection against the sadistic. That such tools may be wielded more effectively by the sadistic than by the altruistic is not my concern. In this sense, I am a dealer in psychological arms. I do not inquire into how the weapons are used, and as a consequence, any discussion of psychological warfare will inevitably arm both sides. Machiavellianism is not power alone. It operates in service of whatever ideological framework you bring with you. My readership includes men and women, Christians and Muslims, self-described psychopaths, as well as committed moralists. The desire for power is universal. What differs is how that power is exercised and to what end. I do not expect universal agreement with my views, just as I do not expect those unwilling to question their own assumptions to continue reading. I put myself first. I enjoy writing, and I enjoy Machiavellianism. And for me, this union is particularly profitable. I do not assume responsibility for how readers choose to act upon my words. Am I perfectly moral by the strictest standards, a paragon of virtue? No, I am far from saintly. Yet the absence of sainthood does not render one predatory or devilish. Like most men, I place myself somewhere between the extremes. 8. In closing, the following summarizes the key points for reference. Morality rarely emerges from rational consensus and is usually imposed through socially useful fictions. Moral systems stabilize society but are inherently vulnerable to corruption. Effective moral action requires understanding strategies commonly associated with evil. Truly moral Machiavellians are rare because power tempts ego. Civilization depends on cooperation, sacrifice, and collective structures, not radical individualism. Extreme individualism erodes trust and accelerates social decline. Machiavellian traits often develop as adaptive responses to instability rather than innate immorality. Ethical nuance requires intelligence and self-regulation. Many adopt morality through indoctrination rather than reasoning. When indoctrination collapses, some swing toward sadism. Claims of moral relativism are often rationalizations for exploitative behavior. Moral debates are usually identity protective rather than truth-seeking. Humans retain the capacity to choose altruism despite an amoral universe. Altruism and sadism are dispositional traits revealed under pressure. Sadists project their impulses onto others and assume restraint is fear-based. Not all people betray equally. Disposition predicts betrayal. Sadists are unreliable and costly allies. Naive altruism is a liability in mixed morality environments. Psychological leverage overrides stated moral values. One exploiter can destabilize cooperative systems. Excessive altruism and excessive cruelty are both strategic failures. Altruism should be selective and strategically deployed. Machiavellian knowledge can be used defensively or offensively. Machiavellianism amplifies existing moral intent rather than creating it. Moral absolutism is unrealistic in complex social environments. Ethics are contextual and adaptive rather than fixed. Understanding dark traits prevents exploitation rather than encouraging it. Power should be balanced rather than denied.